I'm sorry, sir, I don't see your name on the reserved family list. The young woman at the check-in table flipped through her printed pages twice, then a third time, her finger tracing down the column of names. There must be some mistake, I said, still smiling, still certain this would sort itself out in 30 seconds. She shook her head apologetically. I've got the Whitcombs, I've got Mr. and Mrs. Bishop, but I don't see a second Bishop listed for reserved seating. Around me, families streamed past in their Sunday best, grandparents in cardigans, aunts in sundresses, all of them clutching little printed programs with a gold foil pine tree on the cover, Millbrook Preparatory Academy, 5th grade moving up ceremony. Somewhere past the auditorium doors, a string ensemble of 10-year-olds was tuning up, sawing through something that might eventually become Pachelbel's canon. I could see Lily's teacher near the stage, clipboard in hand, herding 5th graders into a line by height. I couldn't see Lily yet. The woman at the table lowered her voice the way people do when they're about to disappoint someone gently. There is general seating in the back, she offered. Rows are first come. I looked past her, through the double doors, to where the front 3 rows sat roped off with little printed reserve cards on each seat. One of them, I was fairly sure, with my own name misspelled as Bishop instead of Bishop, if it existed at all. I thought about the box under my arm, wrapped in brown paper and twine, because Lily liked unwrapping things slowly. No, I said quietly. I think I'll just find a seat in the back. My name is Thomas Bishop. Everyone in Millbrook still calls me Mr. Bishop. Out of habit, 41 years of habit, since I taught woodshop and mechanical drafting at the high school until I retired 6 years ago. I'm 70 years old, a widower, and until that Friday morning, I believe there wasn't a single thing I wouldn't quietly do for my son and his family. I found a seat in the very last row, behind a pillar, where I could see maybe a third of the stage if I leaned right. The ceremony ran 40 minutes. I watched through gaps between other people's shoulders as 5th graders walked across the stage one by one to shake the headmaster's hand and receive a small certificate rolled up like a diploma. When they called Lily Bishop, I stood halfway up out of habit, the way you do at a graduation when you want to see your own, and I still couldn't see her properly, just a flash of her yellow dress and her ponytail bouncing as she crossed the stage. In the second row, I watched Ethan and Sarah stand and clap, and beside them, Sarah's parents, the Whitcombs, stood too, cameras raised. Nobody in that front section turned around. Nobody scanned the back rows looking for me. I sat back down and folded my hands over the wrapped box in my lap and told myself it didn't matter where I was sitting as long as I got to see her walk. When the ceremony ended and families spilled out into the courtyard for punch and cookies, I stood near the back doors for a moment, holding the box, watching Ethan's family get swallowed up by well-wishers, the Whitcombs' friends, teachers, other parents. I could have pushed through. I could have found Lily and handed her the box myself. Instead, I set it down gently on the registration table where the young woman had checked her list twice, and I walked out to my truck in the parking lot and drove home. I built that box myself in my garage workshop, the same one I'd used to build cabinets and bookshelves for half of Millbrook over the years. Cedar, dovetailed corners, a lid that closed with a soft click instead of a slam. Inside I'd placed pages from Ellie's garden journal, pressed flowers she'd dried between wax paper decades ago, and a note in my own handwriting explaining that her great-grandmother, my Ellie, had kept a garden Lily never got to see because Ellie died 4 years earlier, suddenly, in that very garden, on an ordinary Tuesday morning while deadheading roses. A heart attack, the doctor said, quick, painless, over before I even reached her. I still hadn't figured out how to talk about that morning without my voice doing something strange, so mostly I didn't talk about it at all. I built things instead. It was easier. Ethan and Sarah had asked me, 3 years earlier, if I could help with Lily's tuition at Millbrook Prep, just for 1 semester. Dad, Ethan had said on the phone, his agency lost a big client and things are tight, just until we're back on our feet. I didn't hesitate. I set up an automatic transfer straight to the school's tuition office, the first of every month, $1,400, quietly, without telling anyone else in the family. One semester became a school year. A school year became 3. Ethan never brought it up again after that first call, and neither did I. I told myself that was simply what grandfathers did. I drove home from the ceremony with the truck radio off, the cab silent except for the hum of the road. I let myself into the house Ellie and I had lived in for 38 years, hung my good jacket in the hall closet, and sat down at the kitchen table where she used to grade her own students' papers back when she taught 2nd grade. I opened my laptop, logged into my bank's bill pay portal, and found the recurring transfer to Millbrook Preparatory Academy, scheduled, as always, for the 1st of the month. I sat looking at it for a long moment. No anger, no dramatic speech to an empty kitchen, just a quiet, steady decision. I clicked cancel. A box appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment? For the first time in 3 years, I didn't hesitate over that question either. I clicked yes, closed the laptop, and went to bed. I woke up the next morning expecting to feel something like guilt. Instead, I felt strangely light. The way you feel setting down a toolbox you've been carrying so long you forgot your arm was tired. I made coffee and sat on the back porch, looking out at what was left of Ellie's garden, mostly gone to seed now except the roses, which somehow kept coming back every June whether I tended them or not. She used to say the roses didn't need her permission to bloom, just her patience. I missed her most in ordinary moments like that one, sitting with a coffee that had gone lukewarm, nobody to hand the good mug to. Life kept its shape over the following weeks. Tuesdays I still met Hal and 2 other retired teachers at the diner on Main Street, the same booth we'd claimed for 11 years. Thursdays I still helped restock shelves at the church food pantry. I noticed, without meaning to, that my checking account no longer bled $1,400 out at the start of each month. I used some of that breathing room to finally replace the transmission in my truck instead of nursing it along another winter, and I bought myself a new set of chisels I'd been eyeing for 2 years and never let myself justify. Every time I spent a little on myself, some old voice in my head said you should feel guilty about this, and a newer, quieter voice answered back, no, you simply stopped funding someone else's silence. Ethan didn't call. Not that Friday night. Not that weekend. Not the following week. Not to ask if I'd made it home from the ceremony all right. Not to explain why my name wasn't on the list. Not even to thank me for the box, which I assumed Lily had eventually gotten from the registration table, though I never heard a word about it either way. I told myself there had to be an explanation, a clerical error, a mix-up with the school's guest software, something. But a week of silence is hard to explain away, and 2 weeks is harder still. Ellie used to say that silence tells you more than words ever do, if you're patient enough to sit with it. I was starting to understand what she meant. One Tuesday, Hal stopped by the house on his way back from his walk, still moving at the same steady clip he'd kept since his mail route days, even though he'd hung up the bag 9 years ago. You've been quiet lately, he said, settling into the other porch chair without being asked. I've had some things on my mind, I told him. He waited, the way old friends do, not pushing. Finally I said, Hal, have you ever spent years solving somebody else's problem for them without ever being asked to stop? He laughed, short and dry. I raised 2 boys, Tom. Of course I have. Then you understand, I said. He nodded slowly. The hard part was never learning how to help, he said. The hard part was learning when helping stopped being kindness and started being a habit you couldn't tell apart from love anymore. I sat with that a long while after he left. It sounded exactly like something Ellie would have said if she'd still been here to say it. A few nights later, I was looking for a spare fuse in the hall closet and found, tucked behind a shoebox of old photographs, a small wooden birdhouse, lopsided, the roof glued on crooked, Ethan age 9 written in pencil on the underside in my own old handwriting from the year I'd helped him build it in this very garage. I sat on the closet floor holding it for longer than I meant to. He'd been so proud of that thing, carrying it to school for a project, insisting on hanging it himself even though the nail kept bending. People don't turn into strangers all at once, I've come to believe. It happens the way rust happens, one small, unattended spot at a time, until one day you're standing at a check-in table, and the boy who once begged to hammer every nail himself can't be bothered to call and ask if you made it home. One afternoon, I stopped by the hardware store for wood glue and ran into Diane Patterson, who I recognized from the school's front office, the woman who used to handle the tuition billing back when I'd first set up the transfer. She recognized me too. "Mr. Bishop," she said, "how's retirement treating you?" "Quiet," I told her. She hesitated, then said, almost like she wasn't sure she should, "I was sorry to hear you couldn't make it to the ceremony seating." I looked at her carefully. "What do you mean, couldn't make it?" She looked uncomfortable. "I just processed the seating list, Mr. Bishop. I don't set it." I let that sit for a second. "Who sets it?" I asked. "Family submits their own reserved names," she said. "I just print what's given to me." I thanked her and left with my glue, and I sat in my truck in the hardware store parking lot for a long time before I turned the key. 3 weeks after the ceremony, I was fixing the hinge on my garage door when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked at the screen. Ethan. Not a call, a text. My chest did something hopeful and stupid, the kind of hope you feel even when you've had 3 weeks of good reason not to. I opened it. "Dad," the school called. "Tuition's overdue. Need it by Friday." That was the whole message. No "how are you?" No sorry about the ceremony. No question about whether the box had made it to Lily, whether I'd even wanted to be there. Just tuition and a deadline. I stood in my driveway holding the phone for a long minute, the hinge still hanging loose in my other hand. I typed back 6 words. "I suppose you should pay it." I read it twice before I sent it, checking it for anger and finding none, just the plain truth sitting there on the screen. I hit send and went back to the hinge. My phone rang 4 minutes later. I let it ring. It rang again 10 minutes after that. By evening, there were 3 missed calls and a text that just said, "Call me, please," and another an hour later that said, "This isn't a joke, Dad," and a third the next morning. "The school says if we don't pay by end of week, they'll pull her enrollment." Still nothing about the ceremony. Still nothing about 3 weeks of silence. Just tuition, deadlines, and my granddaughter's enrollment dangled in front of me like a lever he expected me to pull the way I always had. I put the phone face down on the workbench and finished the hinge. That night, curiosity got the better of me, and I finally listened to the one voicemail he'd left. "Dad, I don't understand what happened. The bank must have messed something up, or the school system glitched again. Just call me back so we can sort it out." Glitched. Messed up. It never once occurred to him that the man who'd quietly paid that bill for 3 straight years might have had a reason to stop on purpose. He didn't ask if he'd hurt me. He asked if the transfer had failed. I deleted the voicemail and sat on the back porch until the sky went from orange to gray. I hadn't just been paying tuition all that time, I realized. I'd been paying for the idea that nothing he did would ever cost him anything. Sooner or later, I suppose, every idea like that comes due. Saturday morning, there was a knock at my front door, 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 3 more. Hal never knocked like that, and Hal always texted first anyway. I opened the door and found Ethan standing on the porch looking like he hadn't slept well in days, his collar wrinkled, dark half-moons under his eyes. "Dad," he said. "Morning," I answered, and stepped aside to let him in. He walked through the house he'd grown up in like he was seeing it for the first time in years. Ellie's quilt still folded over the back of the couch. The school photos of Lily still lined up on the mantel next to Ethan's own baby pictures. "You kept everything the same," he said. "I like remembering things the way they were," I told him. We didn't sit right away. Finally, he said, "The school called again this morning." "I know," I said. "You canceled the automatic payment." "I did." "Why?" I looked at him for a long moment before I answered. "You really don't know why?" His eyes dropped to the floor. "I figured maybe money got tight for you," he said. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because after everything, his first guess was still about my finances rather than his own conduct. "My finances are fine, Ethan," I said. "Then why?" I pulled out a kitchen chair. "Sit down," I said. "Let's talk about the ceremony first." He sat. The silence after that lasted longer than either of us wanted, until I finally asked the only question that mattered. Why wasn't my name on the reserved list? He rubbed the back of his neck. Dad, it wasn't supposed to look like that. Then tell me how it was supposed to look. The school's software glitched, he said. Half the reserved cards got mixed up that week. We told them our final list weeks in advance. I nodded slowly, watching him. Chaos happens, I agreed. Then why didn't you call afterward, once you knew I'd been turned away at the door? His jaw tightened. I've been slammed at work, Dad. Too slammed to ask if your own father made it home all right. He opened his mouth and then closed it, because there wasn't a good answer, and we both knew it. Finally, he said the words I'd been waiting 3 weeks to hear. I'm sorry. It came out flat, rehearsed, the way you apologize for bumping someone's shopping cart, not the way you apologize for leaving your father standing at a registration table with a gift he built with his own hands. Are you sorry you hurt me? I asked quietly, or sorry the tuition payment stopped? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. The doorbell rang before either of us could say more. Ethan frowned. You expecting someone? I believe so, I said, though I hadn't been, not really. I opened the door and found Sarah standing there, looking flushed, like she'd driven faster than she should have. I didn't know he was already here, she said, glancing past me at Ethan. Neither did I told her honestly. She stepped in holding a paper bag from the bakery downtown. I brought scones, she said, a little uselessly, and set them on the counter that nobody touched. We sat around the kitchen table, the three of us, and Sarah spoke first. Tom, she said, I owe you an apology, and I need you to explain something to me, because I don't think I understand it. I found the tuition notice on the counter this week, the one from the school. It had your name on the account history. I looked over at Ethan. She kept going. I thought your firm's signing bonus covered Lily's tuition, she said. That's what you told my parents at Christmas. I thought you'd been paying it yourself this whole time. Silence sat over the table like a held breath. Ethan stared at his hands. I didn't know it mattered who actually paid it, I said carefully, watching him. It matters now, Sarah said, her voice climbing. She turned to Ethan. You told my father you got a promotion in the spring. You told everyone that. Ethan didn't answer. The rest came apart slowly, the way a knot comes apart once you find the right thread to pull. Ethan hadn't gotten a promotion in the spring. He'd been let go from his agency 8 months earlier, quietly, during a round of cuts nobody outside the company ever heard about. He hadn't told Sarah. He'd been taking freelance design work during the day and driving for a rideshare app most evenings after Sarah thought he was still commuting home late from the office, using savings and then credit cards to keep the mortgage paid, the car lease current, Lily's tuition flowing, and the appearance of a man whose career was thriving fully intact for the Whitcombs, who valued exactly that kind of appearance more than almost anything else. Sarah looked stunned. 8 months, she said. I nodded slowly. Why didn't you tell me any of this? She asked him. Because I wasn't ready to be the version of myself your parents already suspect I might be, he said quietly, and that was the most honest sentence I'd heard from him in 3 years. Sarah wasn't finished. She got up, went to the counter where she'd set her purse, and came back with a small stack of statements she said she'd found while looking for a warranty card in Ethan's desk drawer. I wasn't snooping, she said, almost defensively. I just found them. She slid the top one across the table. Explain this one, she told him. Charges from a downtown steakhouse, twice a month for the better part of a year. Client dinners, he said. For clients you don't have anymore, she said flatly. He didn't answer. She slid another. A men's boutique downtown, nearly $900 in a single charge. I needed to look the part for the Whitcombs' anniversary party, he admitted, staring at the table. You looked the part, Sarah said quietly, on money that should have gone to your daughter's school. I sat there and let them work through it without me, the way I used to let 2 students argue over whose measurement was right until one of them finally checked the tape themselves. Ethan finally said, so quietly I almost missed it, I thought if I just looked successful long enough, eventually it would stop being a lie. Sarah looked at him with something between grief and disbelief. It's been a lie the whole time we've been married, she said. Then I asked the question I'd been circling since the ceremony. Who took my name off the reserved list? I asked. No one decided that on purpose, Ethan said, too fast. I got up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out a folded printout from the drawer where I keep bills. Diane Patterson had emailed it to me 2 days after our conversation at the hardware store, unprompted, an apologetic note attached. She said she'd felt uneasy about it ever since and thought I deserved to see the request as it was actually submitted. I set the printout on the table. Read it, I said. Ethan's face went pale before he'd even finished the first line. It was an email from him to the front office, dated the week before the ceremony, asking that the reserved seating be limited strictly to Sarah's parents and immediate household only, no extended family, quote, to keep things simple for photos. Sarah read it twice. You cut him out on purpose, she said. It wasn't like that, Ethan said. It's exactly like that, she said, holding the page up. There's his name crossed off in your own email, Ethan. You didn't want your father visible next to my parents that day. Ethan put his face in his hands. I spoke quietly into the silence that followed. You know what actually hurts, I said. It isn't that I sat in the back. It's knowing there was a seat with my name meant to be on it. And you gave it away on purpose so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of people whose opinion you decided mattered more than mine. Neither of them answered. Sarah stood up first. I need some air, she said, and walked out onto the back porch, the screen door clicking shut behind her. Ethan sat frozen at the table, looking less worried now about the overdue tuition and more afraid of what he'd just watched himself become in front of his own wife. Sarah stayed out there almost 20 minutes. Through the window, I watched her standing near what was left of Ellie's rose bushes, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular. Ethan finally looked up. Dad, he said. I didn't answer right away. I know I don't deserve you fixing this, he said. No, I agreed, you don't. His shoulders dropped. I didn't want to humiliate you, he said. Then what exactly did you want, I asked. He struggled for an answer that didn't exist. I didn't want the Wickhams asking questions, he finally admitted. So instead you let your own father stand at a check-in table like a stranger, I said. It wasn't supposed to happen right there at the door, he said. I sighed. Ethan, whether it happened at the door or in an email a month earlier, the decision was already made. He had nothing to say to that, because there wasn't anything to say. When Sarah came back inside, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. I called my mother, she said. Ethan looked surprised. Why? Because I wanted to know if she knew about any of this, Sarah said. And she didn't, Sarah said. My parents think you two decided to keep the guest list intimate. They have no idea Lily's own grandfather wasn't even given a seat. Ethan's shoulders sank further. I told your dad you weren't feeling well that day, he admitted quietly. Sarah shook her head slowly. I defended that lie to my own father, she said. The kitchen went very still after that. I wasn't shocked. Once someone tells one lie to protect their pride, they usually need a second lie to protect the first, and eventually they lose track of which version they told to whom. That afternoon they left together, not because anything was resolved, but because there was nowhere left to sit with it in that kitchen. At the door, Ethan stopped. Dad, he said, I really am sorry. I believe you mean it right now. I told him, but meaning it and being responsible for it aren't the same thing yet. I know, he said. Can we fix this? I looked past him toward the porch, toward Ellie's roses. Trust doesn't come back because you say the right words, I said. It comes back because you make different choices for a while. He nodded and accepted that without arguing, and for the first time in 3 years, he left my house without asking me for a single thing. 3 days later, Diane Patterson called the house herself. I wanted to let you know the automatic transfer has stayed canceled, per your request, she said, and also, your son called our office yesterday asking about a payment plan for the balance. So he was finally dealing with the school directly instead of routing everything through me. Small, but real progress. That evening I watered what was left of Ellie's garden, and I thought about how love isn't always giving someone exactly what they ask for. Sometimes it's stepping back far enough that they finally have to reach for it themselves. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Ethan again, and this time he didn't text. He showed up on a Thursday evening with a duffel bag in the truck bed. Selling some things, he said. Almost embarrassed, a leased SUV, 2 sets of golf clubs he barely used, a watch his old firm had given him for a 5-year anniversary he'd since lied his way past. It won't cover everything, he admitted. No, I agreed. But that's not really the point, is it? He managed a small, tired smile, the first honest one I'd seen from him in weeks. A few days after that, Sarah called and asked if I'd meet her for lunch, just the two of us. We sat in a booth at the same diner where I met Hal every Tuesday, and she looked tired but steadier than she had in my kitchen. I wanted you to hear this from me before Ethan tells you, she said. I sold my car, the newer one. I'm driving my old sedan again. You didn't have to do that, I told her. I wanted to, she said. It went straight toward what we owed the school. I've been angry for 2 weeks, she admitted, stirring her coffee without drinking it. But I think I finally understand you weren't trying to punish us. No, I said. You were just done making it easy for us to avoid the truth, she said. That's closer to it, I agreed. She managed a small smile. I wish we'd learned that lesson before Lily had to sit through a ceremony without her grandfather in the front row, she said. So do I told her, and meant it. The following Saturday he called and asked, sounding almost shy about it, if I could help him build an actual budget. He'd never really made one, not once in 10 years of running his own household. We sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours with receipts and bank statements spread out between us, the same way I used to help students work through a cut list before they were allowed near the table saw. Measure twice, waste nothing. The waste pile, once we found it, was bigger than either of us expected, a leased car he didn't need, 3 streaming subscriptions nobody watched, dinners charged to impress clients who never became clients. I can't believe I let it get this far, he said, rubbing his eyes. It didn't happen in one day, I told him. It happened one small excuse at a time, same as everything does. A few weeks after that, he asked me to come see something. He drove me to Millbrook Prep on a weekday afternoon, where he'd started volunteering 2 evenings a week doing basic maintenance and small repairs around the campus, partly to work down what he still owed the school directly, partly, he admitted, because it kept him honest. I met the school's longtime custodian, a man named Reuben who'd worked there almost as long as I'd taught. Your son fixed the whole east hallway door frame himself, Reuben told me. Wouldn't take a dime extra for it either. Ethan looked almost embarrassed by the praise. I've just been thinking about something Mom used to say, he told me as we walked back to the truck. What's that? I asked, though I already knew. Love doesn't need an audience, he said quietly. I stopped walking. You remember that, I said. I remember everything, he said. I just forgot how to live by it for a while. That evening before he left, he set an envelope on my kitchen table without a word. I opened it after he'd gone. Inside was a handwritten letter, not typed, not rushed. Dad, it began, I keep thinking about why you never yelled at me through any of this. I think the quiet is what finally made me listen. I can't undo the ceremony. I can't give Lily back a moment where her grandfather was sitting right up front where he belonged. But I can promise you won't spend the rest of your life wondering where you actually stand with us. I want to earn this back, not just have it forgiven. Love, Ethan. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the cedar box, the same one that had eventually made its way back to me weeks after the ceremony, still wrapped, still unopened, because in the chaos of that day nobody had thought to bring it home to Lily after all. For the first time since that Friday morning, the box finally held something worth keeping alongside Ellie's old garden pages. Autumn came to Millbrook the way it always does. The maples along Main Street turning the color of the pumpkins outside the hardware store. And for the first time in months, I found myself looking ahead instead of circling the same 3 weeks of silence over and over. Healing, I've learned, doesn't arrive all at once. It comes one honest conversation at a time, one kept promise at a time. Ethan seemed to be learning that. So was I. 3 months after the ceremony, An envelope arrived in my mailbox, plain and white, no gold foil pine tree, no printed program inside. My name was written across the front in Lily's careful 9-year-old handwriting, practicing her cursive. Inside was a single card. Grandpa, our school is having a family night next month, and I already told them to save you the seat right next to me. Love, Lily. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 3 times before I trusted myself not to get emotional over a 9-year-old's handwriting. On the night of family night, I drove to the school early, the cedar box on the passenger seat beside me, finally on its way to the granddaughter it was built for. This time, at the check-in table, Diane Patterson looked up and smiled before I'd even said my name. Mr. Bishop, she said, you're right up front tonight, row 1, seat 4. Ethan met me at the door before I'd even reached the table, wearing a plain flannel shirt instead of the designer blazers he used to favor for events like this. He looked healthier than I'd seen him in a year, not richer, healthier. He walked me down the aisle himself, past the Whitcombs, who both stood and shook my hand warmly, past rows of families I half recognized from decades of teaching their children and grandchildren, until we reached the front row, where a small paper name card read Thomas Bishop in Lily's handwriting, taped carefully to the seat. Partway through the evening, between a student art exhibit and a choir performance, Ethan stood at a small podium near the refreshment table to say a few words as one of the parent volunteers organizing the night. Before I hand things over to Mrs. Patterson, he said, I want to say something. I want to publicly thank my father, Thomas Bishop, who taught in this town for 41 years and who has quietly done more for this family than any of us gave him credit for, including me. He looked directly at me. I made a mistake this spring that I'm still working to make right, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise in front of people who matter to us. Sarah reached for his hand. Mrs. Whitcomb, seated 2 rows back, looked over at me with an expression I hadn't expected, something like quiet respect. There wasn't a trace of the old performance left in his voice, just plain honesty, the kind Ellie always said mattered more than any speech dressed up for an audience. After the ceremony, Lily ran straight to me before she found her parents, ponytail bouncing exactly the way it had the day I'd watched her from the back row through a gap between 2 strangers' shoulders. Grandpa, did you bring it? She asked, and I realized Ethan must have told her about the box. I handed it to her right there in the crowded hallway, and she opened the lid carefully, the way I'd hoped she would, and lifted out one of Ellie's pressed flowers, holding it up to the light. Is this real? She asked. It was, I told her. Your great-grandmother grew it herself, right in our backyard. Lily smiled and tucked the flower carefully back inside, closing the lid with that same soft click I remembered from building it, and slipped her small hand into mine. Before I left the school that night, Ethan walked me out to my truck. He stood by the driver's door a moment before I could open it. Dad, he said. Yes. I used to think success meant Lily going to a school like this one and nobody ever asking how we afforded it, he said. He looked back toward the building, where Sarah and Lily stood waving from the entrance. Now I think success is just still being someone my daughter's grandfather is willing to show up for. I rested a hand on his shoulder. Don't waste that lesson, I told him. I don't plan to, he said, and for the first time in a long while, I believed him completely. Driving home that night, I thought about how none of this had ever really been about tuition, or a name on a reserved seating list, or $1,400 a month. It had been about a son who confused looking successful with actually being trustworthy, and a father who'd confused quiet giving with being seen at all. Ellie used to say that love doesn't need an audience, and she was right about that, the way she was right about most things. But I've come to believe it also shouldn't have to hide in the back row either. If you love someone, you tell them plainly, you show up where they can see you, and if you've made a mistake, you say so out loud, in front of the people who matter, not just in a text message asking for money. If this story reminded you of someone in your own family, a parent you've taken for granted, or a mistake you've been meaning to own up to, I hope you don't wait for a ceremony, a crisis, or an overdue bill to finally say it out loud. And if this one meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Thomas's place that morning at the check-in table? If you enjoy stories like this one about family, quiet strength, and second chances, stick around for the next one. Thank you for spending this time with me.